was an assistant pastor at the associate minister was the title at the Solid Rock Baptist Church in Jamaica, New York. That's where I was ordained, and it's the first church I joined as an adult. I was there for about about 8 years. 8 years. We were members of that church actually since for about 13 years, 12 or 13 years. But in ministry there since 1980. No, it wasn't 80, not 87. It's since 89. So about 6 years I was in ministry there.
Okay.
Hmm.
You said that that was the first church you joined as an adult.
Yes.
So does that mean that prior to that you were not as active in the church, or did you?
Well, yeah, I was raised Catholic, and probably until about 10 or 11, um, attended the church. And toward that time in my life, my parents used to allow us to go by ourselves. They didn't go. And then they didn't make us do that. So from that age until I guess I was about 20, I don't know, whatever I was in 1982. Um, I didn't really go to church. I mean, I thought about spiritual things, and I actually started, I would say, entering into a relationship with God probably when I was like around 19 or 20, when I started thinking seriously, but not consistently. But I mean, I
Yeah,
would
I did.
have my times, but mostly I was just kind of being a young man and stuff. So.
Right. Was there any event or a revelation
Hmm.
that spoke to you and said, okay, you really need to get serious about church, and or that calling? Like, when did that calling for you happen?
The calling to the Christian faith began when I was in a choir I went to Harvard University. I was an undergrad there from 1976 to 1980. Graduated in 1980, and I saw a group called the Harvard Radcliffe Coomba Singers. Now they're just called Harvard Coomba Singers because Radcliffe is no longer around.
Right.
Um, I saw them in my freshman year, and it was a group that celebrated the Black experience at Harvard, um, and founded in the '70s, early '70s, during the whole civil rights era. And they used to sing contemporary gospel, some contemporary secular music, and a lot of both traditional or Negro spirituals and European classical Christian music. And they were very good. So freshman year, I saw them, and I became a part of the choir my sophomore year. And being a part of that choir, we were singing a lot of gospel songs and songs about God. That dealt with my whole spirit and my life, because I was doing some crazy stuff as a young man. And then the examples of some of the other students, and particularly of the choir director, who I used to watch. I mean, he was a man of great faith,
Right.
and that sort of really drew me in to the things of God. And so it was an experience over time.
Yes, the
And, yeah,
process,
right,
baking a cake.
right, right. So by the time, you know, and then I met Patricia, and she'd always, I mean, it wasn't even a open issue for her. She was raised in the Baptist church in Kansas City.
Oh wow.
So that was different for me. I never been around anybody like who was like, yeah, church, God, Jesus,
Yeah.
this is what it is.
Right. Sunday, you put it in your
Yeah,
plan
so
book.
that was kind of like wow. And then and right after I graduated from college, and I was actually dealing with those things, and I met the man who eventually became my pastor. And before I actually joined the church, I was involved in Amway with
Oh,
Patricia, and at one of the business conventions, the speaker started talking about Jesus, and at the end did an altar call,
and then you came on.
yeah,
Oh wow!
at an Amway convention.
Oh my goodness, that is.
Which is important because,
right.
it it didn't really mean anything as much as it does now in reflection, in retrospect, because what I've taken it to mean is that I'm not to have a traditional ministry. That I must be about different things,
right.
In terms of the walk, because I was trying to get rich,
right.
and here's God. So.
Yeah, exactly. Shows up and says, "I got other plans for you."
Right. Right.
Now, is Patricia? Patricia is your wife?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, I guess she was the one that you said had a more traditional background. You met her at Harvard?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So how many children do you have?
We have 3 sons.
Wow.
Yeah. My mother ran our family, and both my parents are pretty extraordinary people. And even regular people. My dad was a Jamaican immigrant. He came in 1943. And I've been doing research on my family, so I've learned a lot. Mostly in 2009 when I took a sabbatical, but he came over through special legislation that they made for the Caribbean to fulfill. They needed people to work because of World War II, and he came over through that law, which I found an article on the law and the statistics on these workers. So he became part of the Steelworkers Union early around that time. I don't know what year exactly, but he worked with them for his whole life practically after that, from 1943 or 45 or whatever it was, on till he retired in 1986, I think it was 1982, and he died in 1999. But he was a cabinet maker when he came here. And he became a laborer in a copper refinery, Phelps Dodge refinery, in Long Island City in Queens. While he was at Phelps Dodge, he became an electrician, an industrial electrician. So he was a type of person who was always trying to advance himself. He built furniture. We never had a repairman until I was grown. I didn't know what it meant to have a repairman in the house. He fixed everything: the cars, the refrigerator, the plumbing. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So that was my dad. My mother was born in White Plains in 19. Oh gosh, she's a couple of years younger than my dad. She went to Howard University, which is then one of the black colleges in the country, on a Pepsi Cola scholarship. Pepsi Cola scholarship was a precursor to the National Merit Scholarship Program. But I think it was first a National Achievement Scholarship. But they used to pay full ride plus a bus ticket or whatever, passage home once a year for 4 years for what they called Negro students from around the country.
Okay.
And actually, no, I believe it was black. I found an article on that too, a study on the progress of some of the students. I think it was mixed, but a portion of them were black students.
Right.
And so she got 4 years at Howard, and then she got a scholarship to Howard Law School, where she was a top student. She graduated in 1952, and she was one of the students who helped. She was like a equivalent of a paralegal for the Brown versus Board of Education legislation. So she knew Thurgood Marshall. She knew all of those attorneys, because almost all of them went to Howard. If you were an African American attorney in the 40s and 50s, the only school you go to was Howard.
Really?
So all of them came out of Howard. Some of them went into civil rights. Others did other things. She helped write those briefs, and she tells stories about that and stuff. So they were all part of that whole great migration, of black people, 6 million people coming to the north from the south, all with this kind of seeking something bigger and better, and so that was driving them.
So it seems like, to me, from what I'm hearing, is it safe to say that the civil rights, and I guess it's something that's been kind of like pulsing in your family, as far as like your mother, as far as I guess that undertone that um, black people can achieve, and possibly going after, in other words, some people,
Mm-hmm.
um, they don't take advantage
Right.
of civil rights. They don't excel, But for some
Yeah.
strange reason, it seems like, I mean, your mother was an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Your father took advantage of a law that brought him here.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, I think because I've read about, I think that was some sort of symptomatic of black people as a whole for the
Mm-hmm.
large majority at that time. When you think about 6 million people, not because somebody said go, but on their own, pretty much
Right.
moving. And they study this. It's like amazing. There was no, you know, law. There was no specific, directive, but people made these individual decisions to leave the South and come to the North, basically because they had Jim Crow, and it was still crazy. It was, slavery legally ended, but the system of segregation was killing people. People were getting lynched and whatnot, and the fear of that. So they were seeking a better life. So that was kind of like sort of like in the air.
Right.
And so the civil rights movement was the sort of the height of that.
Okay.
It wasn't it wasn't something that started then. It was something that had been happening for decades. And even Martin Luther King, I mean, he really started out in the early 50s, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So by the time you get to 1968 when he's killed, then laws started being passed and all that kind of stuff. This is something that had been part of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody, you have a lot of folks, when you look at the country in that way, people who didn't migrate,
Mm-hmm.
didn't do so well as a group economically and
Okay.
all. And then the kids of this generation didn't do as well as that generation.
I see what you're saying.
So it's really a that particular time period and who the people were and what they were trying to accomplish that I think my parents were part of.
Mm-hmm.
And because they were really, which is interesting, people think I heard somebody say this, everybody was for civil rights, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. You had a range. You had folks who were like, yeah, into it,
Mm-hmm.
who would go and get hosed and beat up and all that. But not
Yeah.
everybody. Folks was scared.
Exactly.
That was scary.
Right.
That was, and the Black Panthers were happening, all this other. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, there were mixed feelings. People understood and supported what it was about,
Mm-hmm.
but probably if anybody ever like did a census, most people went to work every day, and you know what I mean,
Right.
and tried to still do what they were doing, um, because it was, people died, people got locked up, broken up, killed, whatever, and that was a certain segment of black folks at that time too. So